Hey, what's going on, AP people? We have Alan Brinkley's American History Chapter 9 review video for you today. Jacksonian America. My favorite time period is all about Henry Clay and Andrew Jackson. So let's get going. All right, we're going to talk about the rise of mass politics. And one thing we need to understand is what exactly does the age of Jackson mean? Well, it's often described as a time when more Americans, and at this time it's simply white males, who are participating in politics. They're voting more. And this is in part due to property requirements and tax-paying requirements in order to vote are disappearing in many states. So you see an increase in white male suffrage during this time. And keep in mind that voting did not extend to women or African Americans. So this is mostly just white males. So you don't have to be rich anymore. You don't have to own property. So this is extending to all adult white males, or most adult white males. And Western states also are gaining more prominence as the U.S. is beginning to expand more and more to the West. Now, an example of states getting rid of property requirements is the Dorr Rebellion from Rhode Island, and they forced conservatives in Rhode Island to adopt a new constitution that expanded suffrage for adult white males. So this gets rid of, again, this idea of property requirements or paying taxes. All right, another way that mass politics increases is through presidential electors. It used to be that the electors were chosen by state legislatures, not individual people in the state. However, in 1828, all states except South Carolina allowed for a popular vote of electors who would go on and vote for the president. In 1824, what we see is 27% of adult white males voted. This is a part of the corrupt bargain. 4 years later, when Andrew Jackson wins the presidency, you see 58% of adult white males voting. And in 1840, only 12 years after that, you see 80% of adult white males voting. So this is an increase in the political process by adult white males. And let's look at this graph here. It shows the eligible percentage of people who are voting in elections. And you can see that in 1840 here, it is as high as 80%, and it's as low as 26% in 1824. So you see the trend skyrocket during the age of Jackson, which is essentially from here to there. It goes up quite a bit. All right, also there's a very famous book written called Democracy in America by this guy, Alexis de Tocqueville, and he argued that America lacked typical aristocracies, and people could rise and fall as they choose. So this is just another piece of writing, and we'll see many of these writings that kind of exhibit that, this rags to riches story, that just because you're born poor doesn't mean that's where you will end up. All right, the second party system begins to develop during this time, and many people believe parties were essential to democracy. Loyalty to the party was more important than ideology, and you see this especially during Andrew Jackson's time period. So people had to be loyal to a party. And one way he encouraged this loyalty was through the spoils system, which is patronage or rewarding supporters with jobs. So everybody who campaigned on behalf of Andrew Jackson or helped him out in becoming president, he would give them a federal job for it. Now in the 1830s, we see the two-party system at the national level. We have the Democrats, which are led by Andrew Jackson, and the Whigs, which are led by Henry Clay. The common man president, you often hear Andrew Jackson called. So why is that? Well, he's the first president from the West, from Tennessee. You see that there's equality for all white males. He is against wealthy Eastern establishments such as the bus. He hated the Bank of the United States. He felt that it was only beneficial to the rich. The National Party Convention happens in 1832, and they renominated Andrew Jackson for the presidency. This is a way to nominate presidents that we still see today. This replaced the Congressional Caucus, and it's just a way to have more people be involved in party politics. So again, more power for people. We're going to get into some sectionalism here. We have a guy, John C. Calhoun from South Carolina. We know him. Here he is with his slicked back Dracula hair. He was the vice president under John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson. So he served 8 consecutive years as vice president under 2 different presidents. He wrote a very famous pamphlet called the South Carolina Exposition and Protest. Please make sure you guys know that at all costs. Very, very important. And that urged states to nullify the tariff of abominations, which was a really high tariff. He drew on inspiration from the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. And he used this idea of the compact theory again, that since states created the federal government, they had the ability to nullify federal law. So he urged other states to nullify the tariff. just like Virginia and Kentucky urged other states to nullify the Alien Sedition Acts. However, neither were successful in getting other states to do so. Andrew Jackson had a group of informal advisors that were known as his kitchen cabinet. They were not official cabinet members, except this guy, Roger B. Taney or Tawney, does become a cabinet member later. But the kitchen cabinet is mostly made up of newspaper journalists and close friends of Andrew Jackson who helped advise him. And many people in Congress did not like this because they were not held accountable to anybody since they were not official government positions. All right, very famous debate you need to know about. It happens in the 1830s. This is the Webster-Hang debate, and this is Daniel Webster, the great orator. You can see him down in the picture here, speaking in the Senate. This is a debate about states' rights, which is a position that Hayne held, versus national or federal power, which is a position that Webster held. Hayne advocated nullification of the tariff, and in his second reply to Hayne, Daniel Webster advocated national power, and he basically says there's no way the state should be able to do this, and our union is the most important thing. And he said, liberty and union, now and forever, one and inseparable. So we have the nullification crisis, and I do have a very detailed video on this, so I would encourage you to take a look at this. John C. Calhoun resigns from the vice presidency and he becomes a senator from South Carolina. And South Carolina goes on to nullify both the tariff of 1828 and the tariff of 1832. And the country really is on the brink of civil war here. John C. Calhoun and the rest of South Carolina made it very well known to Andrew Jackson that if he tried to collect the tariffs with the military or by force, they would secede and break away and be prepared to fight. So the country is on the brink of civil war, and Henry Clay comes in and saves the day with a compromise tariff of 1833. This is his second compromise, the second of three. First one was the Missouri Compromise. This is number two. So what this does is it helps out both the North and the South by gradually reducing the tariff rates by 10% per year for 8 years. So you can see the tariff rates up here really, really high. 8 years later, it's going to go down to less than what it was in 1816. So the North is happy because it's not a quick drop. They can get used to this drop. And the South is happy because the end results will be that they have lower tariffs. So the same day that the compromise tariff of 1833 is passed, Andrew Jackson signs the Force Bill, which says that the president could use the military in the future if necessary to collect tariffs. So stuff just got real there between. All right, Andrew Jackson, one major thing associated with his presidency is the treatment of Native Americans. He advocated the removal of natives to the west of the Mississippi River. This is kind of seen as the beginning of this idea of manifest destiny. We also have 5 civilized tribes in the south and the southeast, including the Cherokee Nation. They're located in the south, predominantly in Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and Florida. And these are the tribes that Jackson wants moved out to the west. So we have the Indian Removal Act that is passed in 1830. And this is aimed to move southern tribes to the west of the Mississippi River. A very famous court case, Worcester versus Georgia, happens in 1832, in which the Supreme Court essentially says that natives could not be forced to move out west. And this is where Andrew Jackson supposedly says John Marshall made his decision, now let him enforce it. This is very interesting because the court ruled one thing, and Andrew Jackson does not follow up with the court's decision. So it shows that the Supreme Court is dependent on the executive branch to uphold and enforce its decisions. And again, Jackson ignores the decision, which leads to years later, the Trail of Tears, which happens in the winter of 1838. And this is the forced removal of thousands of natives. It's in the winter. It is just an absolutely awful, atrocious journey for them in one of the darker days in United States history. And 1/8 of them died during or shortly after arriving out west. So we're going to go to the Bank of the United States. The second one, Andrew Jackson hated the bus, as we know. One other thing he did was he vetoed a Maysville Road veto. Jackson vetoed this bill that was part of intrastate commerce. So again, we have this idea, who should pay for intrastate? And that means within a state. So the federal government really at this time does not spend a lot of money, or hardly any money, on projects that only benefit one state. The president of the second bus was Nicholas Biddle. Here he is there. And we have two groups of people, hard money advocates and soft money advocates. And this is something that we will see in the next 100 years in AP US history, so please make sure you are familiar with these terms. Hard money advocates favored payment with gold and silver, and this is something that the wealthy would favor because they have lots of gold and silver. Soft money advocates favored using paper money, and the poor would favor this, and especially farmers, because this would help lead to inflation and it would make it easier to pay off bills. I'm eventually going to do a video on hard money and soft money, but just for now, know who would favor it. And when we get to the late 1800s, you're going to see this be all over the place. So be able to recognize that, please. Okay, so let's continue with the bank war. Here is Andrew Jackson, and he is killing what the boss, or trying to, which he called a hydra-headed monster. And that means every time you cut off the head, two more would be replaced. So he hated the Bank of the United States. So in 1832, before the presidential election, 4 years before the bank was going to expire, Henry Clay in Congress passed a recharter, or tried for the third Bank of the United States. They passed it in Congress. It goes to Jackson's desk, and he vetoes it. And this is the first time ever that a president vetoes a bill because they don't like it, rather than because they think it is unconstitutional. So 4 years before, he vetoes it. And Clay and his friends in Congress do this because they think the American people would be so upset with Jackson that Clay would be elected. That ensures that the bank would not be renewed, but the bank is still around. So Jackson needs to figure out a way to kill it. So this is what ultimately kills the Bank of the United States. And please know this, it is not the veto that kills it. It is the removal of the bank deposits. So what Jackson does is he takes all government money out of the Bank of the United States and he puts them in state banks, which are called pet banks. So now the bus does not have money. Nicholas Biddle starts to call in a bunch of loans, and this causes a huge economic crisis. And this helps lead to the Panic of 1837, which we'll talk about. So we have this guy, Roger B. Taney, or Roger B. Taney, who looks remarkably similar to a wet dog. Look at him. Come on. Right? Golden Retriever, maybe? So he was Jackson's Secretary of Treasury, who was a part of this, the state pet bank plan. And he replaces John Marshall as Chief Justice on the Supreme Court after John Marshall dies. So in 1835, Roger B. Taney replaces and becomes the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. In 1837, one of his first major cases, we have the Charles River Bridge versus the Warren Bridge. This was an issue with a monopoly in a contract. So we have the Dartmouth College case, which said that a contract cannot be overturned. Here, contracts can be overturned or breached if it benefited the community. So Roger B. Taney takes a much different view than John Marshall did under Dartmouth College versus Woodward. All right, we're going to finish up here quickly with Wigs. These are formed in response to King Andrew I by Henry Clay. The reason why they chose the name Whigs was because during the Revolutionary War time period, Whigs in Parliament were those that kind of were favorable to the Americans and opposed King George III. So Henry Clay created this party, the Whigs. They favored a strong central government, and they wanted to promote industry and internal improvements, especially out west. This is Henry Clay's American system. In 1832, we have an anti-Mason party, which is the first third party in U.S. history. And the Masons were a secret society, which both Henry Clay and Andrew Jackson were a part of. So the anti-Mason party was trying to get rid of this establishment in politics. And Irish and Germans, please be able to identify this. We'll see this in the next coming chapters as well. These immigrants that were Irish and Germans tended to vote and be Democrats. Specie Circular in 1836, amid this crisis, Andrew Jackson issued this order that all payments for land to the government must be made in gold or silver, and this was very hard for people to do. This helps contribute to the Panic of 1837, which is up to that point, probably the worst depression in American history. So some causes, we have overspeculation. Anytime you see a panic, you are to think overspeculation, which is simply buying a product in the hopes of selling it for a higher price down the road. We also have crop failures, in part because of the Hessian fly, which the Hessians brought over during the American Revolution. And we also have panics in Europe. It's a perfect storm for a panic in the United States. So what are the effects? Well, hundreds of banks end up failing. Unemployment grows, and this is just like all crises or depressions or panics that we see. It's just a really hard time economically. Also, prices of land are going to drop drastically because people were buying them up so much and they stopped buying them. And finally, we have the independent treasury, which is established under Martin Van Buren. And this is that the government money would no longer be held in private banks. So trying to keep government money out of private banks. All right, the election of 1840, we have Martin Van Buren versus Old Tippecanoe, which is William Henry Harrison, and Tyler too, John Tyler. So this is a nice little slogan. Very popular slogan. Really the first time you see slogans in politics. Also, you see log cabins and hard cider and get the ball rolling. Look at this giant ball. This is actually the phrase get the ball rolling comes from the election of 1840, when in towns there would be these gigantic balls that people would push, and it would have all these different sayings on it, like you see here. So 30 days into his presidency, William Henry Harrison Tippecanoe dies, and John Tyler becomes president. He's nicknamed his ascendancy because he is the first president to ever become president due to a death in the Oval Office. He is a Democrat at heart. However, he hated Andrew Jackson personally. So we're going to see a lot of his policies are really Democratic, even though he ran on the Whig ticket. We have the Caroline incident, which is an American ship that is attacked by the British and it kills one American. It's set on fire on the Niagara River. Other problems with the British include the Aroostook War, which is a conflict between lumberjacks in Maine and Canada. War is averted, and the Webster-Ashburton Treaty settled the boundary dispute in Maine to cut back on this conflict between lumberjacks in Maine and Canada. Another ship that you should know, lots of sea ships you should know, Creole, Caroline, Chesapeake. 100 slaves took over the ship, the Creole, and they fled to the Bahamas. And this scared Southerners because the Bahamas, there was no slavery there. There was this fear that slaves would start revolting against ships. And so we'll finish up with two treaties to know. One, the Webster-Ashburton Treaty. There's Daniel Webster, the author of it. This resolved a boundary dispute between Maine and Canada. Again, this is a result of the Aroostook War. And also we have the Treaty of Shanghai in 1844. We have this guy, Caleb Cushing, who is an American and goes to China to gain trading rights with China. So we have contact with China, and the U.S. gains favorable trading rights. And they also establish extraterritoriality, which is if an American were to break a law in China, he would be tried by American officials, not Chinese officials. And this angers China, but we'll come back to that later this year. All right, that's everything you need to know for Chapter 9. Please take a moment and subscribe to my channel if you have not already. Please, I beg you guys, help me spread the word. I'm trying to reach as many AP people as possible. Throw this video on Twitter, Facebook, Pinterest, Vine, you name it. Please help me spread the word. If there's anybody who could benefit from this, let them know. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the section below. Thank you very much for watching, and have a good day, guys.